We have witnessed in the last year and a half more Christian persecution than in the previous 6 centuries combined. I mean, this is probably once in a 1,000-year crisis when you put everything together. And now people are being emboldened in other countries of the world, and we are literally looking at the elimination of ancient Christian communities, not just in the Middle East, but in other countries all over the world.
Johnny Moore on this very program just yesterday discussing the threat that ISIS poses to religious groups around the world, as we welcome you in for the final hour of America's Forum on this Tuesday with Miranda Kahn, J.D. Hayworth. And Miranda, it is worth noting that Johnny Moore said he believes ISIS is intent on a, quote, Christian Holocaust, end quote.
Yeah, this says new images show several ISIS fighters defacing churches, removing crosses, and replacing them with those ISIS flags. Their continued brutality raises serious concerns that ISIS may be on track to becoming one of the biggest threats in the world that we've seen in modern day.
Joining us now with more on this story, Ambassador Francis Rooney, the former United States ambassador to the Holy See and author of the book, The Global Vatican. Also joining us, our good friend out of Newsmax LA, Larry Elder. Gentlemen, to you both, our thanks. Ambassador, let's begin with the article you wrote for The Hill, saying that the response to ISIS needs to be broad and unique. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I was trying to say there is I think we have a almost World War II level of conflict in the world right now, where the threat of ISIS and the related radical terrorist groups that you alluded to earlier are creating a war, a level of Islamic terrorist war. And I know the White House doesn't want to call it Islamic terrorist war, but that's what it is. And therefore, I think we need a more concerted global response to it, like we applied in World War I and World War II, to try to contain the threat, to interdict it, and ultimately eliminate it.
Ambassador, one of the problems that I have whenever I discuss what to do about ISIS is it doesn't take long before somebody says, well, George W. Bush uncorked all of this by lying us into the war. Can we put to rest 2 things? A, that George W. Bush lied us into the war, and B, that there weren't any stockpiles of WMD. Can we put to rest those 2 notions?
Well, I don't think that we really know what happened to the WMD that for which there had been traces of evidence that led to some of the intelligence reports that the president received. They seem to have disappeared. Some people speculated they moved to Syria. I understand some chemical weapons have been used in Syria. But regardless of how we got into Iraq, I think we need to go back to the Iranian Revolution in 1978 and the rise of Arab nationalism to see how this terrorist, strictly anti-Christian, anti-Jewish trends have come about. You know, prior to the Iranian Revolution, there were Jews and Christians in the Iranian parliament, and their beef was with the Sunni Arabs, not with Israel. This whole thing's been turned on its head, and the persecution of Christians continues to increase to the point where I think we face a world war.
Ambassador, you say that we need a global response to fight ISIS. Does that include countries in the Middle East? And are we talking just military response?
No, I think we're talking a much broader effort at containment and response than just military. In fact, military may be the least of the problem. One of the things that we're starting to see now is people pick up the mantle of the Holy See's soft power diplomacy and call on the religions of the world to unite and speak up against this religiously inspired or disguised terror, and particularly calling on the Muslim religion to take responsibility for its own religion and try to work to bring it into consensus with modernity. That's what Pope Benedict's speech at Regensburg was all about, and what Archbishop Tomasi, the UN representative of the Holy See, said yesterday at the UN when he called on, again, the possible support for armed conflict to fight what he considers to be genocide, and to call on the local countries there who have the most to gain and the most to lose to pick up the battle.
Ambassador, as you mentioned, the Holy See has been vocal about this, the Pope himself coming forward to talk about the atrocities of ISIS. Why do you think there's a comparative inactivity or silence from other spiritual leaders?
Well, you know, that's why I wrote that article. I made the reference in it to Will Inbiden, who was in the National Security Council for President Bush, his book about the effort of President Truman to unite religions against communism in 1948 through 52, and that it was only the Catholic Church that stood up unceasingly and quite forthrightly against the existential threat that communism posed to religion and freedom in the world. Many of the other religions actually said things that were supportive of communism, if you read Will's book.
Mindful of that, Ambassador Rooney, I certainly enjoyed reading your article. We want you to stay with us. We will continue our conversation with the former American ambassador to the Holy See right after this. With Miranda Kahn, J.D. Hayworth back with you on America's Forum to continue our conversation with Ambassador Francis Rooney, the former American ambassador to the Vatican. Also with us, of course, political analyst Larry Elder, who checks in from Newsmax L.A. Mr. Ambassador, ISIS has made some very bold threats against Rome, and a spokesman for the group has now said the group's long-term aim is to annihilate the White House, Big Ben, and the Eiffel Tower on its way to essentially world conquest. I'm curious, though, about Rome. Is Rome higher on their list geopolitically, do you believe?
Well, I think they've done two things. Here a while back, they said they thought it would be a good idea to kill the Pope. And then here recently, they said, as part of the beheading of those 21 people, that they would conquer your Rome. And I think they were speaking both literally, because they would like to do that. Like you say, they like to do a lot of things that are heinous and of broad scale. And also I think they're speaking metaphorically for conquer the Western world, Rome being a metaphor for the Western world. And that's why I say I think we're facing a World War II level situation. You know, there are over 1 billion Muslims, and I don't know how many bad ones are, maybe 100,000 or more, I don't know. But you know, remember, there's only 7 to 10% Nazis in Germany. And as Hayek wrote, you know, when you have an entrenched, radicalized, horrible group take over and hold a country hostage, some really bad things can happen. And I think we face that right now with ISIS.
Ambassador, we're talking about a more robust response to ISIS. I'm assuming you mean that that includes American boots on the ground. How many boots on the ground? And secondly, did I read that the National Intelligence Director, James Clapper, is prepared to remove Hezbollah and Iran from the official list of state sponsors of terrorism?
That would be a terrible mistake. That's the front line of the so-called axis of evil that starts in Iran and goes through Syria and has its seaport with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And it would be a terrible mistake to endow them with any more cloak of authority and responsibility and righteousness than the low level of that they have right now. You know, if we're talking about a war, we're talking about wartime levels of containment. You know, why have people like the Charlie Hebdo killer drive to Spain, put his wife on a plane to Syria, and then have him be lost to French and Spanish police and go back and commit that kind of crime? I think when I say interdiction and containment, I mean close the borders, limit how people fly in and out of countries that are dominated by terrorism, so we have a better opportunity to know who's coming in and out, and to therefore improve the ability to track them when they're not in their countries. That involves sealing up the borders quite a bit, and it involves closing air and shipping lanes, and involves a concerted response among both local Muslim nations as well as the Western world.
Ambassador, the Pope, while he hasn't officially endorsed U.S. military action or any military action against ISIS, he has been quoted as saying he does believe more needs to be done to stop the aggressor, meaning ISIS. When does the Catholic Church decide that military force is necessary?
Well, I think Archbishop Tomasi got pretty close to that yesterday when he amplified what Pope Francis said on his return from Korea here a while back about the possible application of the just war theory. I think Tomasi pretty well said almost any means is justified to prevent genocide. And that is kind of the essence of the just war theory, that the threat is so heinous, so broad, and is pan-national. It's not just limited to one or two sovereigns, that extraordinary force and global force is justified to repress it.
But I know there are specific definitions that the Catholic Church lays out. They talk about legitimate defense. Can you describe to our viewers what that is?
Well, the just war theory calls for a threat that is supernumerary and broad, not just a sovereign versus a sovereign, therefore invoking a non-sovereign response, which is what I think Archbishop Tomasi was referring to yesterday when he said a broad community of nations, and especially including Muslim nations who are closest to the problem and have the most to gain from solving it. The other thing it calls for is proportionality, and that was a problem with Iraq too, where the Vatican felt that the taking Saddam Hussein out was not necessary to solve the problem. I don't think anybody would say that the most aggressive response would be proportional to the heinous crimes that ISIS has committed.
About a minute remains in this segment, Ambassador, so maybe 40 seconds for your answer. We're hearing reports that Pope Francis has said his papacy will be short, and it seems to suggest that he might contemplate retirement, as did his predecessor. Did Benedict start a trend we're going to see among future popes?
Well, I think we will. Pope Francis has hinted at that, and with the longevity that we see now in people, and with the intense scrutiny that all public officials are under, it wouldn't surprise me if Pope Francis, should he become ill, he seems to be in good health now, would decide, just as Pope Benedict did, out of an act of humility, that if he can't do the job, it's time to retire and get someone in that can, because the job's of critical value to the world.
Ambassador Francis Rooney, we appreciate your thoughts on what's happening geopolitically and what may happen with the future of the papacy. You should know, as our former ambassador to the Vatican, we thank you for your time, and we're coming right back.